The air above the ruined coast shimmered with heat and spores. Captain Elias Varren stood on the half-collapsed observation deck of the Resolute, staring inland where the once bustling city of Portosera now lay strangled in alien growth, blackened. Towers jutted out of the earth like the broken bones of giants, their frames wrapped in pulsating vine flesh that dripped corrosive slime into the streets. What was left of the wind carried a thick, metallic scent that clung to his throat, and, even from this distance, he thought he could hear the faint, wet clicking of the creatures that infested the ruins. Land had betrayed them. Elias had fought wars across 3 continents, 5 blockades, and commanded men in sieges where every street cost a dozen lives. He had believed there was no environment on Earth beyond human endurance. Yet now, as he looked inland, he felt the same sensation that had gripped him the first time he'd seen artillery fall short on a barren ridge, the unmistakable realization that here, humans were not the masters. The land itself had turned hostile, and it devoured anyone foolish enough to step ashore. Boots clanged on the steel deck behind him. Lieutenant Darius Holt emerged from the stairwell, a hard-eyed man with the posture of a soldier who had never truly left the battlefield. His dark hair was clipped short, his jaw set in a constant expression of calculation. Scouting party didn't return. Darius reported without ceremony. That's the 3rd in a week. Same pattern. They vanish. Past the shoreline, no comes, nothing. Elias kept his gaze fixed on the horizon where the city's carcass shimmered beneath the alien sun. They're gone, he said quietly. Every one of them. The land eats men now. Darius exhaled sharply through his nose. So what? We stay adrift until the tanks run dry. You know we can't resupply forever out here. There's no harvest, no game, no soil left to till. The sea still feeds us, Elias said. His tone carried the weight of conviction, though his thoughts were far less certain. It is the only place left that doesn't crawl with those things, and as long as it shelters us, we'll endure. The door clanged again. Engineer Marcus Cade ducked through his jumpsuit stained with oil and his hands black with grease. His thick arms were smudged with burns from welding torches, but his eyes burned brighter than any flame. He looked perpetually restless, as if every second not spent fixing something was a personal affront. You'll want to hear this, Marcus said, waving a battered datapad. Water purifiers are stable, but the generator array won't last another week unless I get more superconductors. Half the systems are running on spliced wiring from broken consoles. It's a miracle we haven't fried the whole damn ship. Elias finally turned from the poisoned city. Can you keep her alive? Marcus snorted. I've kept worse alive, but she needs parts. Metal, circuits. And unless the sea's hiding a scrapyard down there, we'll have to risk scavenging inland. Elias said immediately. His voice cut like steel, final and unyielding. Captain Marcus countered, his brows knitting together. If I can't keep these ships powered, we lose lights, filtration, heat. The flotilla sinks and everyone aboard drowns. Care how bad the land is? I said no. Elias's tone hardened. I will not send more men into that. We'll find another way. Darius gave a bitter laugh. Another way. Captain, we're surrounded. The sea is deep and the land is death. There is no third option. The silence that followed stretched taut until broken by the hurried footsteps of Midshipman Leon Rail. He was young, barely into his 20s, with hair too long for regulation and an energy that seemed to overflow into every movement. His uniform was perpetually untucked, his boots perpetually muddy from clambering around the ship's hull. Despite the hard times, his eyes carried a fire that neither hunger nor despair had extinguished. Sir, Leon called breathlessly as he skidded to a halt. You need to see the scanners. We've got movement, not on land underwater. Elise's attention snapped toward him. "How many?" "Too many for a school of fish," Leon said. His grin flickered nervously, betraying that he had no idea whether the discovery was salvation or disaster. "It's big. Whatever it is, it's big." For a moment, the four men exchanged a look that carried the weight of unspoken dread. The oceans had been their sanctuary, the last expanse untouched by the alien plague. If that was no longer true, if something else had come for them beneath the waves, then their refuge was no safer than the land they had fled. Elias felt the ship sway beneath his feet, as if the sea itself had shifted in warning. The Resolute groaned, her patched metal plates creaking like an old warrior straining against armor that no longer fit. He thought of the men scattered across the flotilla, families who clung to the promise that the waters would keep them safe. If the sea too had turned against them, then humanity's last chance at survival was already slipping beneath the tide. "Sound general quarters," Keyless ordered at last, his voice steady, though his heart pounded like a drumbeat in his chest. "If the sea wants to test us, then we'll remind it that man was born from water long before he ever conquered the land." The alarm klaxons wailed, echoing across the ships. Sailors scrambled to stations, torpedo tubes were primed, and makeshift harpoons fashioned from salvaged machinery were hauled into place. The flotilla that had once been a fleet of refugees now bristled like a cornered predator. Elias turned. To his officers, his expression unreadable. "The land may be lost," he said. "But as long as the seas are ours, humanity will endure. Ready yourselves. Tonight we find out if the water is still safer than the ground we abandoned." Ocean stretched endless before them, vast and unknowable. Somewhere beneath its shifting surface, shapes stirred slow, deliberate, and rising, and for the first time since land had fallen, the men of the sea felt the weight of uncertainty settle upon their shoulders. The sanctuary might not hold. The tide might already be turning. The first contact with the ocean's new inhabitants came at dusk. The horizon burned red, and the flotilla rode, the swells like weary beasts returning from war. The Resolute cut the water with a steady keel, her patched hull shuddering as though she too feared what lay beneath. Elias Varren stood on the command deck, one hand gripping the rusted railing, his eyes scanning the darkening sea. He had spent his life trusting the ocean's moods, but tonight its surface looked like a mask concealing 1,000 secrets. The sonar pings echoed through the ship's belly. Each hollow pulse returned, distorted, the readings smearing across. The screen like ink spilled on paper. Marcus hunched over the console, muttering curses as he recalibrated the sensors. "Something's down there," he said finally, his tone edged with both frustration and awe. "And it's smart. Whatever it is, it's bouncing our signals back at us, like it knows we're listening." Darius Holt stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the display. "Then we treat it as hostile. We don't wait for it to climb aboard and introduce itself. We strike first." Leon Rail, leaning too casually against the bulkhead, shook his head. His grin was quick, almost reckless. "And if it's food, the sea's handing us something other than kelp and dried fish for once. Maybe it's dinner, not an enemy." The room fell into a silence that was sharper than any argument. Food was the one subject that silenced even the most hardened men. Supplies dwindled daily, and Marcus's hydroponic experiments had only just begun to produce more than a trickle. Elias considered Leon's words, but saw the fear flicker beneath the younger man's bravado. "Prepare for both," Elias ordered. "Harpoons ready, nets charged. If it bleeds, we'll eat it. If it bites back, we'll kill it." The sea answered before the men could. The first breach tore the water open less than 50 meters from the bow. A massive shape surged upward, scales glinting in the last light of day. Its body coiled like an eel, yet armored with ridges that looked grown from volcanic rock. its maw split wide, lined with teeth curved like hooks, each one glistening with a faint green glow. The crew shouted as the beast crashed back into the depths, sending waves battering against the hull. Elias steadied himself, heart hammering. He had seen monsters in war machines, bombs, men who killed without hesitation, but never a living thing so vast. The sonar screamed again, and Marcus swore as 3, then 4 more signatures appeared. There, circling us, Marcus said, his fingers flying across controls. They're not random. They're hunting in formation. Elias didn't hesitate. All ships, engage. Hold formation, drive them off. The ocean erupted in chaos. Electrified nets were hurled over the side, sparking as they hit the surface. Torpedoes fired from jury-rigged tubes streaked into the waves, exploding with muffled thunder. One of the beasts thrashed against a net, its body convulsing as arcs of lightning ran across its scales. The air filled with a stink of ozone and something far fouler. Like burning algae, Darius barked orders, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. He moved among the men with precise efficiency, dragging one back from the edge when a tail slammed against the hull. Keep the lines taut. Aim for the gills when it surfaces. His composure was iron, the calm center around which the storm raged. Leon, meanwhile, was everywhere at once. He sprinted along the deck, hauling cables, firing harpoons, even laughing when a splash nearly knocked him overboard. His recklessness infuriated Darius. But Elias saw something else in the boy's fearlessness, an echo of the mad courage that had always allowed humanity to endure. Marcus remained at the console, sweat dripping from his brow as he adjusted the power flow to keep the weapons running. Circuits are frying. I can give you another 30 seconds at most before the grid collapses. That's all I need, Elias said. His eyes tracked the largest beast as it rose again, jaws open wide enough to swallow a launch craft. Fire on my mark. The creature breached, its glowing maw rushing toward the bow. Elias waited until he could see the ridges in its throat, until he could smell the salt and rot of its breath. Then he gave the signal. The forward torpedo slammed into the beast's mouth and detonated. The explosion threw seawater high into the air, drenching the deck with rain that stung of acid. The monster convulsed, shrieked in a sound that rattled every rib in Elias's chest, and then sank beneath the waves, trailing dark blood. The others scattered. 2 vanished into the depths, and 1 lingered just long enough to thrash its tail against the Resolute, leaving a jagged dent in her flank before retreating. Then the sea grew quiet again, as if nothing had happened. The crew stood stunned, chests heaving, weapons lowered. Marcus sagged against his console with relief, his hands trembling from the overload he'd forced through the circuits. Leon wiped blood from a shallow cut on his cheek and gave a wild grin. "Dinner?" he said breathlessly. "Told you it was dinner." Darius glared at him. "That thing would have swallowed you whole." "Yeah," Leon replied with a shrug, "but it didn't." Elias let the banter wash over him as his thoughts churned. They had survived, yes, but survival was not victory. The beasts had been coordinated, intelligent even. The ocean was no longer an untouched refuge. It was a battleground. And if these creatures multiplied, if they learned, then humanity's last sanctuary would close around them like a cage. The carcass of the slain monster drifted nearby, its massive body glowing faintly in the dusk. Elias gave the order to haul it aboard. The crew cheered weakly as hooks sank into its flesh, but the captain's eyes lingered on the dark horizon. For every one they killed, how many more waited in the deep? That night, the flotilla burned with activity. Marcus oversaw the butchering of the carcass, directing men with knives and saws to carve meat from its armored body. The flesh was tough, but edible once seared over makeshift grills. The crew devoured the first real meal they'd had in months, grease and blood streaking their hands. For a fleeting moment, laughter echoed across the decks, but Elias did not join them. He remained in his cabin, studying charts spread across the table. Darius entered quietly, carrying a strip of roasted meat, which he set down without comment. "You saw what I did," Elias said, without looking up. They were organized. They didn't attack like animals. They moved like soldiers. Darius nodded grimly. "And they'll be back. Next time, with more. The land belongs to the plague." Elias murmured, "Now the sea tests us. If we fail here, humanity is finished." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Elias straightened, his jaw set with a renewed resolve. "We adapt. That's what we do. We will learn these waters, master them as we once mastered the land. We'll turn every weakness into a weapon. And if the sea throws monsters at us, then we will become the greater monsters." Darius allowed the faintest trace of a smile. "Then we'd better start training men who can fight underwater." By dawn, Marcus had already begun designing reinforced diving rigs from salvaged hull plating, muttering about oxygen flow and pressure seals. Leon volunteered to be the first to test them, grinning at the chance to prove himself. Darius drilled the crew on coordinated responses, turning panic into discipline. And Elias, standing once more on the deck as the sun rose over the endless waves, felt the stirrings of something he had not known in months. Hope sharpened into purpose. The ocean was no longer safe, but neither was it beyond their reach. Humanity had always been at its fiercest when cornered, and now they were cornered on all sides. Elias watched the men prepare and knew the truth in his bones. The land had rejected them. The sea would challenge them. But between the two, humanity would choose the water, and they would not be beaten far beneath the waves. Sonar picked up the faint, deliberate echo of returning pings. The creatures had not gone far. They were waiting. The next confrontation was already promised, and this time the ocean would not yield so easily. The flotilla grew into something larger than Elias Varren had ever imagined. What had once been a scattering of battered ships lashed together for survival had become a sprawling city of steel and salt, drifting across the ocean like a sovereign kingdom. Old freighters were welded to tankers, aircraft carriers became floating capitals, and oil rigs were converted into towering strongholds, bristling with antennae and makeshift cannons. From above, the collection of vessels looked like an armored reef moving endlessly with the currents, a fortress of men clinging to the only realm left to them. Elias walked the deck of the Resolute, surveying the vast structure they had birthed. Smoke rose in orderly streams from cooking fires. Nets were stretched across the sides where fish and the flesh of slain sea beasts dried in the wind. And children few but vital ran along catwalks laughing, their voices carrying across the waves. For a moment, it almost felt like civilization again. Almost, yet beneath that fragile veneer of normalcy, war sharpened its teeth. The creatures of the deep were no longer rare hunters striking at chance. They had become a constant presence, their attacks growing more coordinated with each encounter. Every victory the humans won carved more scars into their fleet, forcing Marcus to repair damage faster than it was inflicted. Every battle forced Darius to drill the men harder, welding discipline into them with sheer willpower. Leon, reckless as ever, became the spearhead of each engagement, plunging into danger with a grin that concealed the knowledge that death hovered close. One evening, when the sea burned orange with the sinking sun, the Resolute's comms officer burst onto the deck with a transmission unlike any they had received before. It was not human. The alien council's voice filled the air, carried on distorted frequencies that no natural signal should have reached. The words were translated by Marcus's salvaged systems into a cold, resonant tone that made the men uneasy. Humans, you persist beyond your measure. The land has judged you unworthy, and yet you defile the waters as well. The Kethari declared this transgression intolerable. Withdraw to extinction quietly, or be annihilated where you cower. Murmurs rippled through the crew, but Elias stood unmoved. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, jaw clenched. "Transmit reply," he said, his voice low but firm. "What should I say?" The comms officer asked. Elias turned eyes hard as iron. "Tell them the seas belong to those who master them, and tell them humanity does not kneel." The message was sent. Silence followed, but it was a silence heavy with promises of blood. The following week tested those words. A fleet of alien land-borne craft appeared on the horizon. Vessels never meant for the sea, yet adapted crudely to float. Towering siege engines mounted on broad platforms spat fire across the waves, shells screaming as they arced toward the flotilla. The first impact struck a tanker, shattering steel and igniting oil across the surface. Men leaped into the flames. Their screams lost in the roar, Elias stood on the bridge, issuing orders with the calm precision of a man who had walked battlefields his entire life. "Hold formation, dive the subs. Lure them closer." Marcus's voice crackled through the comms powering launch tubes. "Now. We can give you one salvo before the grid cooks itself. Make it count," Elias said. The sea became a theater of fire and thunder. Depth charges boomed beneath the waves, geysers rising as submarines darted through trenches cut into the ocean floor. The humans knew these waters, mapped them with painstaking care. While the alien craft blundered across the surface blind, Darius led a detachment in fast skiffs, weaving between the enemy platforms under a hail of fire. His men hurled explosive harpoons into the engines, detonating with surgical precision. One platform tilted, then capsized, dragging alien machinery screaming into the depths. Leon, of course, had volunteered for the most reckless role. His skiff raced dangerously close to the largest platform, its guns swiveling to tear him apart. He grinned into the wind, then leaped onto the enemy deck as his craft veered away. Blade in hand, he cut down the startled alien crew with savage fury, buying time for charges to be planted along the vessel's core. When he dived back into the sea, the explosion split the platform in two, fire lighting the waves around him. The battle raged for hours, the night sky flashing with fire, and lightning as men and aliens clashed across the ocean. By dawn, the sea was littered with wreckage, oil slicks burning in long trails, and the alien fleet lay broken. The flotilla, battered and bloodied, still stood. Humanity had not only endured, they had struck back. On the deck of the Resolute, the survivors gathered, their bodies streaked with soot and salt. Elias looked over them and saw something he had not witnessed since the land was lost. Pride unbroken. "We are not prey," Elias declared, his voice carrying across the waves. "The land belongs to the plague, but the sea, this sea, belongs to us. Let the galaxy bear witness. Humans rule the waters." The men roared, fists raised, voices carrying over the wreck-strewn ocean. It was not just survival anymore. It was dominion. Yet in the quiet that followed, Elias stood apart. He had seen too much to mistake this battle for victory. The aliens had tested them and underestimated them. That would not happen again. Next time, the full weight of the council would descend upon them. And when it did, even the sea might not shield them. Later that night, Thaddeus joined Elias on the deck, where the stars burned clear above the black water. "You know they'll come harder," Thaddeus said quietly. "This was only a taste." Elias nodded. "And we'll be ready. You really believe that? Elias did not answer immediately. He thought of Marcus bent over his machines, inventing weapons from scraps. Of Leon laughing even as death brushed past him. Of the men and boys who had chosen to stand against the impossible and prevail. Yes, Elias said finally, because the sea has always belonged to no one. Not the plague, not the Kethari, not even us. It respects only those strong enough to claim it, and we will claim it, or we will die trying. Far below them, the sonar pulsed again, faint but deliberate. The ocean was not silent. It never would be. The war of land had ended in humanity's ruin, but the war of water had only just begun. The ocean had never been so still. The flotilla drifted beneath a gray sky, its vast patchwork of steel platforms and ships stretching across the horizon like a slumbering giant. Men moved quietly along the decks, voices hushed as though they sensed the sea itself was holding its breath. Elias Varren stood at the bow of the Resolute, eyes fixed on the endless expanse ahead. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on his shoulders, heavier than any uniform he had ever worn. The Kethari were coming. He had no doubt of it. The Council had already shown their intent by sending siegecraft, crude vessels. Never meant for water, yet deadly enough to test humanity's defenses. That defeat would sting them. The Kethari were arrogant, but not blind. Next time, they would not underestimate the men who had turned the sea into their fortress. Next time, they would bring something designed to kill not just men, but oceans themselves. Marcus Cade confirmed that fear when he stumbled into Elias's quarters, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, grease-caked into every crease of his hands. He dropped a datapad onto the table. The display flickered with intercepted transmissions. Diagrams blurred but unmistakable. They're seeding bioweapons, Marcus said hoarsely. Engineered plankton that multiply fast enough to choke entire seas. They'll strangle the water. Kill the fish, rot the oxygen. If they release it, we're done. No purification system can filter death itself. Elias studied the diagrams, his expression carved from stone. Where? Carriers, Marcus said. Modified dreadnoughts, 3 of them. They're moving into position right now, just beyond the shelf. I can't tell when they plan to release the payload, but once it's in the water, there's no reversing it. Darius Holt entered then, summoned by grim instinct. His eyes moved from Marcus's exhausted face to Elias's steady one, and he knew without being told. We have to strike first. Elias nodded. We end this at sea before it begins. The plan that formed was desperate, audacious, and unmistakably human. Marcus would overload the geothermal vents beneath the seafloor, chaining eruptions together into a devastating wave of fire and steam. The eruptions would obliterate the carriers. If the flotilla could lure them into the kill zone, but it would also risk tearing the ocean apart, unleashing chaos that could consume friend and foe alike. Darius accepted the danger with the same iron calm he carried into every fight. We'll need to bait them close. That means skirmish lines. Fast craft. Men who don't expect to come back. Leon Rail volunteered before anyone else could speak. His grin was bright despite the shadows in his eyes. I'll lead the bait. Someone has to be loud enough to make those bastards chase us, and no one's louder than me. Elias wanted to refuse, but he saw in Leon the same reckless fire that had carried humanity across oceans long before they had conquered the skies. To deny him would be to deny the very spirit they fought to preserve. Then make it count, Elias said quietly. When the Kethari came, the sea shuddered beneath their advance. The carriers rose from the horizon like black cliffs, their hulls bristling with towers that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Smaller escorts churned the water ahead, firing volleys of corrosive shells that hissed as they struck the waves. The ocean frothed with alien engines, a tide of steel and intent. The flotilla split. skiffs darted like silverfish across the surface, skimming dangerously close to enemy guns before veering away. Leon's craft led them all, his laughter carrying. Across the comes even as fire rained around him. "Come on, you bastards, you want us. Then chase me." The carriers adjusted course, ponderous but relentless. Elias watched from the bridge as the alien fleet lumbered into the trap. Every nerve in his body burned with the weight of the gamble. If Marcus had miscalculated, if the vents failed to ignite, they would be crushed beneath the might of the ocean and the enemy both. Marcus's voice crackled over the comms, taut with strain. Charges primed, pressure climbing. "Another minute, maybe less." "Leon," Elias called. Static, then laughter. "Still here, Captain? They're right. On my tail? Don't be late." The first eruption tore the sea open with a roar that swallowed the world. A column of steam shot skyward, hurling waves the size of towers across the battlefield. The alien fleet staggered, hulls groaning as they slammed against the swell. Then, the second vent erupted, then the third, until the ocean itself seemed to detonate in fury. The carriers, caught in the maelstrom, buckled under the assault. Fire licked their hulls as volcanic heat surged upward, tearing metal and flesh alike. One split apart, sinking into the churning abyss with a wail that echoed across the water. The second was swallowed whole as the sea collapsed beneath it, dragging it into the molten maw below. The third, wounded but defiant, loosed its payload. The canisters burst open above the water, spilling clouds of engineered plankton that glowed a sickly green as they spread across the waves. Leon's skiff turned sharply, engines screaming as he raced straight toward the release. His voice cut through the comms, fierce and unshaken. "Tell my brothers, the sea is ours." He rammed the canisters head-on. The explosion was blinding, fire and green light fusing in a violent bloom. When the glare faded, nothing remained of Leon or his skiff, only a patch of boiling water where the poison had been. Elias closed his eyes for the briefest moment, grief slicing through him like a blade. But when he opened them, his gaze was hard. "Finish it," he commanded. The final eruption rose beneath the third carrier, a cataclysm of fire that split its hull apart. It collapsed into the waves, sinking in a cloud of ash and steam. The Kethari fleet was no more. Silence followed, broken only by the groaning of steel and the hiss of cooling waves. The men of the flotilla stood stunned on their decks, the reality of what they had achieved dawning slowly. Against impossible odds, they had defended the seas. Against an empire that ruled land across 1,000 worlds, they had stood unbroken. Elias addressed them from the bow, his voice carrying over the hushed waters. "The land was lost to us. It betrayed us, turned against every step we took upon it. But here, on the waters, we found our strength. Tonight, we showed the galaxy that humanity does not yield. We will not be driven to extinction. We will master the seas, and from them we will rise again." The crew roared, their cries rolling across the waves like thunder. Some wept openly, not only for victory, but for the brother they had lost. Marcus bowed his head, exhausted but alive, already thinking of how to rebuild. Darius stood silent, pride and sorrow warring behind his steady gaze, and Elias, though his chest ached with grief, felt a fierce certainty settle within him. The oceans were no longer sanctuary, alone they were dominion. Humanity had carved a throne from the waves, and no empire could take it from them as night fell. The sea glowed faintly where volcanic fire still simmered beneath the surface. The stars shone clear above, reflected in waters that had been bought. With blood and defiance, Elias watched the horizon and whispered to himself words that would echo through history.